Welcome. Hey, just getting everybody logged into here. Excited for today's webinar. I'm Chad McDaniel with Execs in the Know, and I know how busy everybody is. So thank you for coming on today's webinar. And I brought some great guests that I'm going to introduce here in a little bit. But my goal for today is not only taking on, I think, a extremely relevant and important topic for us as a CX leadership community, generative AI agents, and I use the word agents for CX, and really separating some of the fact and fiction. So our guests, Dan and Heather, they're going to help me or help us as a community really separate through the fact and fiction. So I want this to be as collaborative as possible. So as audience members, as we're going through the conversation, if you could please use the Q&A box, the question box there, as we're unpacking different concepts or comments, please put your questions in there because we learn together as a community. So this is how it's going to happen. We're going to do some quick introductions here. We got a couple things I want to go through. We're going to have the panel discussion with Heather and Dan. Q&A at the end. I'll make sure I get to your questions. So please put your questions in there, and then we'll just do a quick wrap up and final thoughts. If this is your first time to Execs in the Know, I've been running the community for the last 15 years. We are a large corporate CX sharing community called Leaders Learning from Leaders. You do not have to do this journey alone. There are so many peers of yours connecting and sharing insights and best practices. We really are a think tank, a thought leadership community. Just go to execsintheknow.com, go to our Knowledge Center, Events tab, About Us. There's lots of information with it. And I just want to say to our board, if we have any of our board members listening today, thank you for your advocacy, really being leaders in our space, not only within your respective brands, but really our industry and elevating our industry as a whole. So we couldn't do it without our advisory board and some of their guidance. I just want to say thank you. Hard to believe, Dan, I know some of your team members will be with us next week. We're in our in-person event, and I know it seems like it's next week, but hey, if you can get to Palm Springs, we've got room for you. Just reach out. I mean, we've got an amazing agenda. This is our in-person summit. It goes over 2.5 days. It's phenomenal. If you've never been to one, I would encourage you to come out. But this is next week. So send me a quick note, chat at execsintheknow.com if you think your schedule can quickly accommodate. Last thing, if you can't get to Palm Springs, my last advice would be join our private online community, Kia Know-It-All. That's a great way. We have over 1,000 members on it. It's like a LinkedIn on steroids, but we're asking very direct questions and insights, all sorts of information being shared. Any information you want, again, chat at execsintheknow.com and join the online community. All right, enough about Execs in the Know. Dan and Heather, I want to get to you two. We've got an important conversation, and before we even get there, Dan, let's start off with some quick introductions. I'll start with you. If someone is not familiar with ASAPP and what the company does, maybe you could tell us a little bit about it, but then your role, and then Heather.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chad. My name is Dan Rood. I lead marketing for ASAPP. ASAPP has been started as a very deep research company in the area of AI about 10 years ago, and really started focusing on use cases in the customer experience space. Fast forward, I'm happy to say we're a Forrester leader for digital automation. I got to give a little plug there, but our focus has been primarily on automating things that were hard to do. How do you help agents with tooling to help them speed up the pace and the excellence and the accuracy of the job that they do? And then just recently, and I know we're going to talk about this a lot today, we are focused very much on generative AI agent technology to really look at leveraging new technologies to automate things that were previously impossible to automate. So very happy to be with you. Love this community and this audience. So thank you.
Well, I'll say quickly, Dan, we'll go over to Heather here. Dan, we appreciate the support of ASAPP, one of our leaders in the space industry, so many clients of yours, I think, are community members, Execs in the Know. I really want to push you to stretch the boundaries of today's conversation and get us thinking. And of course, as Senior Vice President of Marketing, Dan, we know how busy you are. We greatly appreciate your time coming out and sharing with us. Heather, welcome. You're going to make us all bright and smart at the end of this discussion, right?
Hi, Chad. It's really great to be here. I'm really excited to hear questions from people attending this. I'm very excited to dig into some of the facts versus fiction of generative AI and generative AI agents. My name is Heather. I've been at ASAPP for coming up on my 6th year anniversary, and I've spent a lot of time at ASAPP trying to think about customer experience, agent experience. I spent a lot of time on side-by-sides with agents, trying to understand, why they take this job, what sort of pain points they have, what tools do they use to solve this job, and, what they want to see from future technology. And so, when we developed the generative agent product that we'll, sort of talk a little bit about, but just kind of the technology in general, I hope to be able to share some experience that I've had along the years of being in this space.
Well, not hope, Heather, you will be sharing that experience. So let's lean in. I'm going to step off camera just because I know, Dan and Heather, you've worked real hard for today's conversation. Guest, thank you again for your time. Please put your questions as we're going throughout the conversation so we can continue to ask and share together. Okay, let's get started.
Awesome. Let's do it. Thank you again, Chad. So we mentioned this in the introduction. The hope today is to have a conversation around a specific area of generative AI, which is generative AI agents. And in preparation for this session, Heather and I were going through the last few weeks about how do we organize the topic. And so we really have 3 buckets that we want to hit over the next 28 to 30 minutes. And the 3 topics that we're going to hit are, number one, really start with there's an inherent skepticism of generative AI agent tech. And so we want to just talk briefly about the hype versus what is actually a reality today. And then 2, we want to transition and get to the fun stuff, which is really the business cases for generative agent, what we are experiencing, what we're seeing in the market, what we're seeing with our own customers. And so we want to talk about business cases for that. And then finally, hit some fact or fiction just around the frequently asked questions that we hear from customers around deployment. What is it, Heather? Security, hallucination, APIs, some of the tech that is involved for companies that are starting to express a lot of curiosity around where to get started. So let's start with topic number 1. I just kind of loosely labeled this the promise versus the reality. So Heather, we talk about this a lot. There's a lot of people who are familiar with generative AI, of course, but in terms of defining the terms, when you think about generative AI agents, can you help us just define the difference between generative agent and generative AI, just on a general standpoint?
Yeah, on a general standpoint, generative AI is a type of AI technology that can create or generate really new content. So this is different from other types of machine learning where you might give it a specific task, like classify this type of message into one of a finite number of categories, or given some inputs, rank something on a list. Generative AI is different in that it will generate new text. So you don't have to think ahead of time about what are all of the possible scenarios that I want some kind of machine learning model to choose from, or to pick the best one. Generative AI will generate or create new text or images or videos for you. So there's a lot of flexibility there for that. So that's generative AI. That's the underlying technology. Generative AI agents is an application of that generative AI technology. And so the generative AI, as an AI technology, is extremely flexible. It can do a lot of different things. I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar have played around with ChatGPT, asked it questions that you might have normally asked a Google search. Maybe you've had it help you do some of your work or your homework, et cetera. And it's really flexible, and it can help you do a whole wide range of things. Generative AI agents is a very specific application of it, where you've now configured an an agent to solve very specific tasks. So what we're talking about here is in the customer service space. I now want to harness the power of that generative AI technology to solve a very specific use case for me. So that's the main difference between the two.
So I don't know why I love this question. Hopefully it hits a reality. When you're thinking about, I've heard this literally specifically from prospects, when you're thinking about, isn't generative agent just another rebrand of a chat bot or a voice bot? I've heard that a lot. Like, isn't it just a rebrand? What's the difference? So how would you, if you had to make the case, Heather, to go, damn it, this is not the same, right? How would you label the difference between chat bot, voice bot versus generative agent?
As someone who has spent a lot of time in my early years configuring a chat bot, I take issue with the notion that this is just a rebrand of traditional chatbots, because traditional chatbots, and I kind of hinted at this a little bit earlier when we were chatting. With traditional chatbots, you have to think about all of the situations that a customer might encounter, or that questions that they might ask, and how you would treat that customer, depending on calls to an external system and what that data comes back. So, for example, if a customer says, what is my bill this month? It might, with a conventional chatbot, you might be able to program that you can retrieve the bill details, and you could say, okay, if the bill is this, say this to the customer. But then what happens when the customer says, well, 3 months ago, my bill looked like this. Why is it different? You would have to be able to, ahead of time, configure your chatbot to understand that, okay, customer is asking about bill from 3 months ago. So I need an API that can call the bill from 3 months ago. You'd have to figure out all of the variation of the things that customers would ask and how you would treat that customer. And for some use cases, kind of like this billing problem that I'm talking about, it becomes intractable almost immediately, because you can't configure and enumerate all of the possible different scenarios. And even if you could, it's a nightmare to maintain, to be able to say, and then no one wants to make changes to it. With generative AI, and this is what I had hinted about before, it's extremely flexible because it's creating new content. So you don't have to necessarily think through all the different ways that you would treat a customer and their situation before you deploy it. You can give, as high level or as detailed instructions to your generative agent as you want, on how a generative agent should think about responding to the customer in certain situations, what it should do when it sees certain data about that customer. And you can trust that the generative AI underlying technology is smart enough with its reasoning capabilities and flexible enough with what it can respond with, to be able to actually resolve the customer's concern without escalating to a live human agent.
So I want to follow up on that. Before I do, I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning. We want to hear your questions. So in the console, you'll see a Q&A button. So please feel free, hit us up with questions. We'll try to hit them throughout or at the end. So just a reminder of that. Heather, the reason you and I have been around this, I've been around this space for about 12 years. You've been around this space for some time. The reason I'm calling this out is that there is a deep skepticism over the past 7 years of these frustrating chat and voice bot experiences. So there is an element where it's these unfulfilled promises. So you're hitting on it, but if you were having to concisely hit, what are the elements that were missing from a chat and voice bot that's now something very specific that you can do today that you couldn't do yesterday?
I think the kind of 3-ish things that I'm thinking about, the things that were missing are the inability previously to really intelligently reason about the conversation so far. So the ability for a model to understand what the customer is saying, the problem that they're having, and the data that it can retrieve about that customer, and how to reason about those two things to help the customer. That was missing from traditional bots, because like I said before, a person, a program manager, would have had to think about what to do in scenarios. And a lot of the scenarios you might not have encountered before, or they're just so nuanced that you can't configure those things. Right. The second thing, the generating content. You couldn't do that before with a chatbot. You had to pre-program what that content, that response to the customer was going to be. And then I think the final thing, and this often gets missed, is just the personalization, right? Customers, want a personalized experience when they're trying to interact with a chatbot, not because they want this thing to be their best friend, but they want to feel as if their specific personalized problem is being solved. And without that, there's that skepticism. Like this thing, with a traditional chatbot, it doesn't know what I'm asking it. It doesn't know me and my problem. I just want to get to a live person because then I can explain it better and I can trust that a live person can reason about this better. So those are the things I think that we're making traditional chatbots, that skeptical that generative AI chatbots can actually solve the problem.
And I think full disclosure for those unfamiliar with ASAPP, we've spent a lot of years building a really amazing chatbot, and we have really great customers on it. So we think we've built a model that's really, really great from a chatbot standpoint, but in learning, we have seen the limitations of that as well. I want to transition into the business cases, but before we do, I did have a poll question for the audience. Do you believe the generative AI agent is ready for mainstream adoption? So it's a pretty simple question, kind of your own appetite. Do you think this is potentially available for your type of business? And then we kind of give a yes to all the way to a no. So let's see the results on that poll. I'd love to see it myself. I'm clicking. Here we go. Uh-oh, they're still coming in, I think. I'll give that a second. Yeah, I'll give that a second and go back to it. So let's go, Heather, so we talked about some of the rhetoric there, and there's real rhetoric out there and there's a lot of skepticism and there's a lot of excitement because we are seeing a bunch of things that we were not able to do in the past that we can do now. So if we think about business cases, Heather, if we're leaping forward in technology, then the question is kind of who cares unless it solves a big problem. So what are you seeing in terms of business transformation that the audience might start to imagine with a generative AI agent technology that they can do today that they could not do yesterday? What are we going to help you solve that makes this worth evaluating?
Yeah. Let me start with an obvious one and then a less obvious one that I think is also important. The obvious one is that with generative agent technologies, you can solve much harder problems that, like I alluded to before, are just intractable with traditional chatbots, right? So you would never be able to configure some of the more nuanced things of a traditional chatbot. And so now customers can they can self-serve with these generative AI chatbots. I want to know my flight status. I want to know my account details. I have questions about why these things are the way that they are on my bill or my account details. And I think that helps them, self-serve. I think they want to be able to get these answers for themselves if the technology exists to enable that for them. And so what will end up happening is that customers will opt to use this technology versus trying to talk to a live agent. And I know live agents are, very important, and they're pretty crucial to a business. But I think we'll talk about later what that means. The other kind of less obvious thing is that you can more easily gain insights into what your customers are reaching out about and how they're being treated with generative agent. And you can do that with live agents as well, but with live agents, there's a lot more variation on how the customer is treated with a live agent, because these are people who are very good at their jobs, but they are not necessarily adhering to the same set of instructions the way a generative agent is. And so when you have some kind of summarization tool at the end that is trying to extract insight, it is so much easier to do that with a generative agent where the conversations are a lot less variable and they're more compliant than it is with live agents. So I would say you can solve many more customer problems, particularly the nuanced problems that are not possible. And it's also much easier to gather business insights about why your customers are reaching out, how they're being treated, and what you can do with that information.
Okay.
I feel like I've been talking a lot. Dan, do you have any thoughts on kind of this leap forward and what businesses should do with this type of technology?
I do. Actually, before I do, let me go back to that poll question.
Oh, yeah.
I think I got it to work now. All right, so we want to pull up the results. Sorry, I'm seeing what I'm seeing on the console. Here we go. So it looks like, from a result standpoint, most people put themselves in kind of the either the yes or the not sure, want to find out more, but there's some appetite for that. So that's really interesting to see. Heather, you're asking me the question around whether customers are ready for this. And one of the things that I've spent 11, 12 years in this industry. And one of the things that was interesting to me about this topic was the idea of agents losing jobs. Like, it's everywhere with AI. There's this dystopian fear, which I think is completely relevant, which is, are we just, building tech, taking jobs? And what I've observed, I came into the CX space in 2012, 2013. And I happened to work for a company that was the first to launch a true cloud solution in CX, like multi-tenanted cloud architecture, built on the cloud, et cetera. And one of the hopes at the time was that if we use design principles to build better tools, then agents will stay in the job longer. They'll be happier in the job, because it's been a problem for a very, very long time. And what was crazy to me, you fast forward to 2024, and despite all the advances in technology, the amount of agents that are either quitting, or companies that are having a hard time filling those empty seats, or absenteeism is as high as it has ever been since we started recording it. And so for me, one of the promises is that there's a piece to the types of roles that some agents have, where it is very repetitive in a highly emotionally charged environment. And to be able to finally take use cases that start pointing agents toward more complex, more meaningful use cases, to me is I hate when everybody says the word game changer, but it feels that way. And it's part of the reason I'm here, is that I was frustrated with how cool cloud tech wasn't and isn't solving the problem of agent attrition. And it's causing huge problems in CX. And it has been for a very, very long time. So that's where my excitement falls. It's not to go, hey, let's take jobs. It's more like agents are having a tough time staying in the seat, which is why 60% of companies are seeing massive turnover every year. So I like that part as well, to help kind of shrink the size of that pizza, to go, how do we take more and more use cases with automation finally for the first time? So I do get excited about that.
Yeah. And I think also, in my almost 6 years at ASAPP, I've spent so much time sitting next to agents and just asking them questions about their job, why they took this job. And I think always at the heart of it, agents, they get into this because they want to help people and they want to solve hard problems. That seems to be uniformly kind of, why they're in this. And if you hit on it, it can be emotionally charged, and the agent is kind of, the person that the customer might be yelling at. So that can be a little bit draining, especially, if it's all day. I could see as an agent, you got into this because you want to help people and you want to solve hard problems. But if some measurable amount of your time is spent on, any kind of repetitive stuff that's, not very challenging or being yelled at, I could understand why agents might decide maybe this isn't what I thought it would be.
Yeah. We do have some questions coming in. I'm going to save some of them for the end, but there's one on this topic that I thought is a good question. The question that came in is, can you speak to how AI impacts staff differently? Great skilled agents do better than average agents. I think I'm misreading that. Hold on, let me try that one more time. Can you speak to how AI impacts staff differently? Great skilled agents do better. Average agents perform less well at first. So this is it's kind of on this topic about staffing. What is the role of the agent? I'm really cognizant of this too, Heather, because I've been at these conferences for a long time, And we've been saying again for 10 years, the role of the agent's going away, automation is going to take over. And like when you think about this, because we've spent a lot of time helping agents with automation, how do you see it? You already spoke to it. Hit that again, maybe if you will. What do you see? What's your dream? In Heather's world, what's your
Yeah.
dream role of an agent versus Gen agent?
Yeah, I think whoever asked this question, that great skilled agents, they do better than average agents, and how AI impacts that. I think that's 100% right. Like great skilled agents, they're skilled because they are experienced with the problem space. They have the ability to reason about what this customer is asking and what information and tools do I have available to solve the customer's problem. Because often the customer is not they're not asking their question in a very clear way, right? Like if they knew how to articulate it, they'd probably be able to self-serve possibly. And so they're asking these really nuanced questions. And so a great agent can understand what the customer wants, is aware of all of the tools that they have available, and they know how to solve that problem. I think there's definitely a very important role for those types of agents in a world where generative AI agents are handling the majority of customer interactions. So the vision that I see and that I really hope for live agents who love this job for the reasons they got into it is that they have a role as a human in the loop with generative agents, where when the generative agent maybe gets stuck because you've not configured it to handle a certain use case correctly, or the customer is saying something that the generative agent, this long tail of stuff that it can't quite figure out. I think this is where the really great agent as the human in the loop comes in, and they can guide generative agent on what to do next, right? You can guide generative agent. Customer is asking about this. Use this tool that you have available. Here's some clarification about, the information that you just got back from a knowledge base or from an API. And I think this sort of solves the reason that really great agents get into this business in the first place, because they want to help and they want to solve hard problems. And now what you've done is we've abstracted away the monotonous stuff, collecting information, and you've put a layer in between them, between angry customers and the live agent, right? Like, generative agents can handle that abuse now, and the live agent can just focus on the part that they're really good at and the part that they really enjoy.
One more question around this. Maybe we can use a specific deployment or deployments that we've done, like real specific use cases. One of the questions, and by the way, I see some really good questions coming around security and integration. So we're going to get to those in just a second. But there was another question that came to us to describe the characteristics of a company that's well suited for adopting this next gen capability. So with that, I'm thinking about Heather. We're doing implementations right now. Maybe give some examples of a company that is deploying generative agent, and then we can speak maybe more broadly to what we're observing with customers. But yeah, tell us a use case.
Yeah. Well, one that comes to mind, because it's one of the more recent ones that we've done, is a company that had a lot of customers that reach out. Well, it's an airline, so I think that makes it more contextual. But there tends to be a lot of high volume all at once, and then maybe low points, right? So maybe there's like a storm and a bunch of flights are being canceled, and you have a lot of people reaching out at once. With generative agent, can handle a lot of volume all at once, unlike human agents that can typically only handle like a maximum concurrency of 2 or 3, depending on the use case. But the companies that we see that are really well poised to adopt generative agent are companies that have systems that they're willing and able to make available to generative agents. So I'm talking about kind of APIs that generative agents can have access to, and call those APIs to retrieve information about the customer. So that's kind of a prerequisite for generative agents to be able to do their job and do it well. It needs information about the customer to be able to handle that customer. So I would say that sort of kind of IT thing is probably a prerequisite for generative agents. So customers that are at least willing to make those APIs available for generative agent. Although I will say, and maybe we were going to get into this later, that doesn't necessarily mean that there needs to be any IT or development work to create new API endpoints. What you should do with your generative agent vendor is choose one such that the APIs and the systems that you have available that can be readily used by generative agent technology as it is. What you don't want to have to do is spend a ton of development time creating these new APIs for generative agent. Those are the types of companies I think are best poised for this technology.
I love it. And the example you're giving for a particular airline, are there any call outs that because this particular airline is earlier on, what do you have any highlights of like results that we're able to share that they're seeing?
Yeah. So there are a couple of metrics that we tend to look at. One being containment rate. I don't love it as a metric, as I don't love it as a proxy for success. Although I know it is a metric that, in the industry, everyone tends to look at it, right? If you ask any contact center leader, what's your containment rate, they're going to know it. So we do look at that. But if you're not careful, you could end up over optimizing for containment rate at the expense of the customer experience and actually resolving the customer problems. So the metric that I do really like to look at is first contact resolution, or FCR. So of all of the chats or the calls that are coming in, what % are you resolving on that first contact? And so the deployment that we're kind of recently into. We ran an A/B test, as we always do for deploying safely. And on the control, which was a traditional VA system for handling this particular use case that we were deploying, had a containment rate of 31%. And just after the first week, generative agents containment rate was already 55%. So an improvement of 24%, which was huge, right? Because that's kind of how you measure your cost reduction. It's, the inverse of escalating to a live agent. But as I mentioned, I think the more interesting thing to look at is FCR. And that increased from 75% on the VA to 90% with generative agent. And that was just after the first week of deployment. And so, we and the customer configured this generative agent to handle this particular use case. And, on day one or day 7, after 1 week, it was resolving 90% of customers that came through, and they weren't chatting back within 24 hours. That number has since grown, as we learn about what are the situations that generative agent is, escalating because it's getting confused or there isn't information available to it. So, part of that resolution has been the customer making more information available to generative agent. And part of that has been us working with the customer to fine tune their implementation of generative agent to be able to address ambiguities better than it had been previously.
Love it. And I think generally to that question that was asked about characteristics that a company might have, obviously there's a lot, but what we are observing is for most contact centers, there is a percentage of your interactions that are the most frequently asked questions, of course, and that varies. You'll have companies where 60% of their interactions are 10 questions. And so if you're looking and thinking about deployment, a lot of companies are starting very use case specific, which is this example that Heather, you're giving, which is, there's some that are going full in and some that are saying, hey, let's take these few use cases, garner success from it, and then start expanding and growing. So it's hard to say the perfect characteristic, but obviously if you have a contact center, if you have a lot of these tier 1 interactions that are very frequent to you, it's a great place to start because it has the most bang for the buck. If you can knock out 5 use cases that constitute the majority of your interactions, there's immediate jump in terms of cost savings. The one thing, Heather, before we kind of go into the maybe more lightning round, when we get into kind of some of the fact and fiction around the technology, because there are a lot of questions that are coming in about that. I don't want to lose the end customer here, because right now we're talking mostly about agent experience, cost savings for the company. There's efficiency, of course. I'm reminded, though, I don't know, Heather, if you've ever read Ken. It was a guy named Matt Dixon wrote a book like 9 years ago called Effortless Experience. And in the book, it talked about that the research that they did around CX was that the thing that the end customer wants most is what they call return to the steady state, which means customers most of the time want their problem solved and solved quickly. That's like the number one marker for most customers. Did you solve it? Awesome. And did you do it fast? So when you think of the benefit to the end customer, you and me experiencing an engagement with a generative agent, what are you seeing, and what is your hopes that from an experience level ultimately can help these customers differentiate their brand by having great experiences for customers? It's a long-winded preamble, but I get excited about this. What can be beneficial for the end customer here?
Yeah, you did hit on a lot, but let me tease out some of it. So for the customer experience, I think that's 100% right, and we've seen that with our own user experience research as well. Is that customers want their problem solved? They want it solved quickly, and I would also add that they want it solved consistently. I think what can be extremely frustrating for customers is when you call in and you get one answer from an agent, and then you call in later as a follow-up and you get a completely different answer. And I think that erodes trust in just the customer service space in general. And so one thing that customers might not even realize that they want is that they want answers, and they want them consistently. And they want to trust that an answer that was given today is going to be the same answer if they need to call and follow up, that they're going to get the same answer, in the future. And I think generative agents, enable that, and they enable it because you write this, this specification about what the rules are and how a generative agent should solve particular problems. And generative agents they're going to follow that document. If they don't, and I think we'll get into this in the lightning round, what happens then when you have mistakes, but for the most part, you've provided the scaffold and these logical reasons of how they should do it. So they want their problem solved. I think we've already covered that generative agent has enormous flexibility and its reasoning capability for how it should go about solving customer problems. It can, keep the context of the conversation. It can be flexible. It being solved quickly. So it is quick, right? And I think if quickly compared to a live agent, live agents, if they're not calling APIs on the command line, right? Like they're using actual tools to do this job. And those tools might not be very fast, right? So a live agent might have to type in the customer's name, type in their account number, do the verification, right? So there might be security questions on the screen they would have to ask, get the customer's answer, and then verify those things. That all takes time because the agent has to do that work. When you give generative agent access to your systems, it's an API call, right? So it's not instant. It can take 2 to 10 seconds depending on the API, but then Gen Agent immediately has the information. And so the bulk of the interaction time then between the customer and a generative agent is on the customer. So the customer is no longer really waiting on the live agent to go and use a tool to solve this problem. Generative agent is doing it much quicker, not instant again, but much faster than a live agent could if she has to navigate a whole bunch of tools. And then I think I hit on the consistency thing, right? So you've provided the scaffold and the generative agent will follow it. Unlike, with live agents, if they don't have the resources available for how to solve a certain type of problem, they're going to do the best that they can in that moment. There's often not time for them to go and ask a supervisor, what to do. So they're doing the best that they can. And unfortunately, often it's just, it might not be consistent.
Love it. Okay, so at the time we've got, let's transition to maybe some semi-lightning round. So we have a bunch of questions coming in, which is really good timing because this is how we want to end. There's questions that are coming in around, what if we have garbage data? How do you ensure quality? hallucinations, so some of this from a tech, which you've touched on, but let's start with kind of a good fact or fiction. Generative agent is not safe enough. Generative agent, it hasn't been stress tested, right? Can we trust it? So when we're thinking about trust, I think what comes to mind is mostly around hallucination. Let's just start there, actually. Let's start with hallucination, trust testing. Like, how would you, having gone down this journey now with early customers over the last year, like what does this look like?
Yeah. So I think anyone that says that their generative AI technology doesn't hallucinate or can't make mistakes, it's just not true. And so it's more about how you prevent them real time and then kind of fix them. And so one thing that has been really helpful over the last year is and we have a very dedicated research team to do this, but we think about what are the ways that generative AI technology can make mistakes, right? It's not good enough to just ask, was there a mistake here? Because generative AI, it's not self-aware enough to know that it made a mistake, and so we have to think, what are the types of mistakes? And the way that we sort of think about it, generative agents, if they say something that is untrue, there's really two axes that the untruth can come from. It could say something that is unjustified, meaning, did generative AI agent try to say something that wasn't grounded in information that it had as part of this conversation? So from the knowledge base, from API systems, and this gets tricky. There's a little bit of a gray area because the same Gen AI technology that underlines all of this, right? It's trained on the real world data. And so it might be trained on some of our customers' data. So it knows what an airline is, right? It knows, in general, how many hours before a flight takes off a customer should get to the airport. And so the same technology that makes it reason really well and be flexible is also the same technology that might cause it to think that it can just rely on its underlying data. And so what we do is we, at every turn of the conversation, before generative agent wants to say something to the customer, we ensure that what it is saying, all of the information has been grounded on the APIs and KB and the instructions that we've given it. If it hasn't, then it needs to try again. The other axis here is, is the information that the customer, that the gen agent wants to say to the customer, is it justified, right? So there are some times where the generative agent wants to say something to the customer that maybe isn't grounded on information, but actually is true. So that example that I was talking about, maybe generative agent is going to tell the customer, you got to arrive 2 hours before your flight takes off. That might very well be true. And so there's no black and white, this is right and this is wrong. It's a scale. Really, it's a two-dimensional scale of, was something justified or not justified, or was it grounded or not grounded? And when you have the worst of both of those, that not only was it not grounded but is also not valid, that's bad, right? Because now you're telling the customer something that's not true and not grounded. And the way that you fix those things varies, right? If the information is just not available to generative agent, you need to make it available, either by fine-tuning your instructions or providing it access to more knowledge or API information. So I think, at ASAPP, we think really deeply about how we should treat when generative agent wants to make a mistake and how we fix it in the moment. And we've gotten, really good at it, and it's a huge area of focus for us.
Heather, not to oversimplify it, but I think the question sometimes is, one, how much, all things being equal, how much does a generative agent, how often do they make a mistake versus a live agent, right? And then two, would also be the consequences of an AI that goes off the rails. And so I think, just briefly, when you think of, there's agents make mistakes, and so generative agent is going to make mistakes. there's that category of accuracy, but then there's also maybe the one that people really think about is my company going to end up on Reddit because there's a racist bot? Or like we've all seen these things that happen. Can you delineate between those two? Like one that's really about like, oh my gosh, how do we make sure that thing doesn't say something crazy, versus just, hey, how's our accuracy versus a live agent, just for all things being equal?
Yeah. Certainly live agents make mistakes. I've alluded to this before. They're trying their best with the information they have in that moment, but they're going to make mistakes. They're going to use their best judgment. Occasionally that's, it's not correct. Generative agent, when you compare to the kind of innocent or mistakes that a live agent would make, generative agent makes way fewer, like orders of magnitude fewer mistakes than a live agent would make. And that's because it is really good at adhering to what you have told it to do. If it turns out that it made a mistake, it's because there's something configured not correctly, or there's something missing, and all you have to do is fix it, and that's fine. The type of like embarrassing Reddit stuff that I know that we've all seen over the past few years from when Gen AI technology came out, that's that out of the box as part of any generative AI product cannot happen, right? Like you would have, any Gen agent product would have so many guardrails against protecting against customers trying to get it to do something bad. And I think whether it's ASAP's Gen agent or any other vendor, there's so many like really great vendors coming out about with guardrails on how you can implement this. It's a huge area of research just across the industry. And so unless you're being really uncareful with your generative agent, like that shouldn't be a thing anymore. You should be able to protect it against customers trying to inject something nefarious. You should also be able to configure whether you want your generative agent to engage in any conversation that is out of scope. So you should be able to define what is in scope for my generative agent to talk about and what is out of scope. And you should be able to add examples and topics that are in scope versus out of scope and fine tune it that way. So all of these guardrails exist across the industry and certainly within our product. So to me, that's not a concern that someone who's seriously considering implementing this should have. If you were just going to try and slap GPT on your website and let it free on customers, then, or sorry, not just GPT, any large language model,
Sure.
that you should worry about it then.
Love it. Let me pull an audible. We've only got 12 minutes left. We've got a bunch of really good questions. So let's hit some of those questions real quick. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. Chris Connor, you asked this really great question. Is human reinforced feedback for generative content required or recommended? So is it human reinforced feedback to generate content required and or recommended, Heather?
Required, no. Recommended, yes. Right? You would configure your generative agent, before you deploy it. Someone probably has a lot of experience with how customers engage about this, and so you do your best to configure it. Maybe you deploy it with an A/B test or some kind of phased deployment to make sure that you're doing it safely. But inevitably, there might be things that you haven't thought about that your generative agent comes into contact with live with a customer. And so what you should do, and what we enable, is providing feedback on either the conversation as a whole, on how it was handled, or on the individual turns of the conversation. Generative agent shouldn't have access to that system. It should have access to this system. It shouldn't have interpreted the API result this way. This is the actual correct way to do it. And then you can, that feedback can be incorporated into the configurations. So I think it's the difference between, configuring your generative agent to set it and forget it versus having that human feedback to fine tune how it's performing.
Love it. Another question from Colleen. The question was, vendors tell me that they have a, quote, pre-trained LLM for customer service or employee domains or IT domains. Is that possible? So is it possible to have a pre-trained LLM for customer service or employee domains or IT domains?
It is possible. Without knowing which, any of the specs about the large language model, it would be hard to say the performance of that pre-trained model. Because at ASAPP, we pre-train models and fine-tune larger models all the time, depending on the task that we want to use it for. I will say the power of the largest language models that we see, the benefit of using those and then configuring them for an IT domain or an employee domain, I think that is the better way to go, because the reasoning capabilities of these largest language models is so much better than any model that you could train on a subset of this domain. So, for example, with our agent augmentation chat recommended responses as part of our messaging platform, we have models that are trained on historical data to specifically learn, what agents have historically said and make them much faster at their jobs. That is an application where a pre-trained LLM or a fine-tuned LLM does a really good job, because it's very specifically narrow task. However, when you want a large language model to really reason about the conversation and remember the context from the beginning of the conversation, you need one of the handful of large language models that are out there to be able to do that.
Love it. Another question. The question says, great discussion. Can you describe the relative costs of configuration, tuning, and maintenance of my new generative agent versus human agents? Are skills transferable, or do I need new skills? So it's kind of a couple of things in there. There's the relative cost of Gen agent versus a human agent. And then there are, I think it's a good question, like, what are new skills I'm going to have within the contact center operation? I would say the first one, Heather, on the cost savings, it kind of goes back to what we were describing earlier, in that the cost of an agent turnover all in is around $17,000 to $20,000 every time an agent quits. So if you have 60% turnover in a given contact center, as we said earlier, if you can reduce the overall load of rehiring that is constantly taking place, there is a good ROI calculation that you can do for human agent versus that in terms of number of interactions. So you can kind of do a one-to-one comparison. In terms of skills, what would you say to that? Because there are new skills that have to be developed in this world. What would you highlight?
Yeah, I think there are there's slightly new skills, but a lot of it is the same, right? If you've created training material, and often this is some documentation that, if you have it, is really helpful for generative agent training material for live agents on how to handle customers and resolve their issues, and what to do in certain situations. That type of knowledge and skill is exactly the same as for generative agent. And the way that we configure within our tooling, how you configure your generative agent, you can essentially take that training material and just port it into generative agent. The new skill is how you kind of say those instructions. And I joke with my team a lot that I think I've become very good at configuring generative agent and prompting LLMs because I'm a parent of a toddler. And you say things in a very strict, in a very, matter of fact way. Do this, don't do that. Here's the reason why. And I think it's very much the same for large language models and how you prompt them. Just very, very matter of fact. This is how you solve the problem. The occasional why it's this way. Those are the types of skills that are, that we have training materials. It's very easy to pick up. But other than that, it's very, for contact center leaders who are going to configure generative agent, the skills transfer very easily.
Let's bring Chad back in because I know we have a few minutes left. Maybe last thing from you, Heather, shameless plug, why this audience might consider looking at generative agent technology in 2024, going into 2025. What would be the thing you're most excited about?
I think the thing that I'm most excited about, I know I've harped on this so much, but the potential is huge, right? It can solve so many more problems than a traditional chatbot. It can solve them fast. It's a great user experience. And not only to all of that out of the box, but just the ability to configure and fine tune it for your brand. It's such a cool technology, and it's what makes me excited to work on this every day. And I'm very excited to share it with the world and see generative agents solving problems.
Love it. And as we're turning it back over to you, Chad, just a reminder, in the resource center on the app, you'll see a link to a generative agent demo, some other resources there. But yeah, Chad, let me turn it back over to you, and we can close out.
Absolutely. Hey, Dan and Heather, fantastic job. I couldn't be more thrilled with your conversation today. The best way to shut chat down is give them no time to answer questions and debate. Because I really wanted to lean in with you on a couple of comments and discussions you guys have been having. Audience, I know there were a number of questions we did not get to today because of time. Here's my commitment, Dan and Heather, that we'll take each question that we didn't get answered, and Dan and Heather, we'll figure out a path how we can get those questions answered and back to you, because you deserve a response to your question. So we will work on that. The other thing I want to call out to the audience, and this is important, we have, Dan, you know this, we've just released the report in partnership with Execs to Know the State of the Tech AI in the Contact Center. And we surveyed a lot of the corporate community members in Execs in the Know. And the findings that came out of that report, I don't remember how many there were, but there were a lot of them. It is well worth the read, and it is well worth looking at some of the data sets. And again, that was in partnership with Execs in the Know. I would encourage it. Audience, this is a journey. We don't anticipate that this is a one and done conversation. We're going to continue to carry on this discussion throughout the next 2-3 years. I've got a lot of things I want to pull out of the time capsule. Dan and Heather, I really want to ask you to be leaders in our community. As you're going down this path, if you have research, if you have insights, you have knowledge, if you could just share it with us, I'll make sure I get it to the larger community at Execs to Know, especially within our Kia platform, the private online community, and just help us as an industry be better in your advocacy for that. That's all I can ask, and appreciate that. So I think based on time, Dan, there was a lot I wanted to get to. We're just going to end on this note. It was an insightful, a needed, a timely state of the state as of September 2024 conversation we had. And I cannot say thank you enough for the enrichment of this discussion, but we need more, Dan. We need to get some more out there. So Heather, Dan, do you want to say any final quick words? Just keep us positive and keep us encouraged.
I think what you said was great. We have a really deep passion for reform, and I think there's just a lot of perpetual challenges that we've had in the contact center for a long time. And just to, as Heather said, there's just a thrilling aspect to be able to finally solve something that we've been talking about solving for 10 years. And that's just, anytime there's a new day, it's lovely to be able to see if we can help our customers. So I appreciate the forum and the opportunity. We will commit to keep contributing, certainly where we can.
Love it. Heather, any last words from you?
Thank you for having us. This was a lot of fun. I would love to do more of these. So thank you.
Well, Dan, I'll leave it on this. If I had the chance, I'd be hiring Heather to Execs in the Know. So keep her well taken care of. I'm sure she's doing great there. Hey, on behalf of myself and everyone at Execs in the Know, have a great rest of your day. Thank you for making time. And again, you are not alone in this. I hope to see you in Palm Springs next week or at another one of our topic-based gatherings. Thank you, and this will conclude today's webinar.